I bought the brand new Xbox Series S. There's not an enormous amount that's new with this console, so it is now available in this black colorway, which is much more similar to the X, and I think personally looks pretty nice. And it also now has 1 terabyte of storage. So that base model Series S only has about 360 gigs out of the box, which when you consider that most AAA titles today are about 100 gigabytes, means that 3, maybe 4 games and that Series S was completely full. This, with a little over 800 gigabytes free out of the box, is a much more usable console. But this video is not here just to talk about the shiny new Series S, but rather to talk about what it's like to buy an Xbox Series S in 2023. Holiday sales are right around the corner. This, while it's $350 right now, is almost certainly going to be on sale in the next couple of months, so I think it's worth just a conversation. Should you go out and buy the Xbox Series S? Or should you save a few extra pennies and dollars and nickels and dimes and buy yourself a Series X or PS5? So I posted this little guy on Instagram the other day, and one of the overwhelming comments was on the price point. So if you're not familiar, the original Series S, the white model with 512 gigs of storage, started out at $300 MSRP. This is a $350 MSRP compared to $300 on the 512. But you're looking at $350 compared to $500 for the Series X. $150 starts to be a little bit more reasonable, and again, you throw the PS5 digital in there, and this becomes a bit harder to justify, which is part of the reason why I think that the killer feature of this is not so much the 1 terabyte, it's not so much the black color, it's the fact that Game Pass exists and is really good. I mean, I think a lot of people are gonna really think once, twice, and 3 times before they spend $70 on a new game. If I've got Game Pass and I'm vaguely curious about it, not only could I just try it out using cloud streaming on my phone or on my Xbox or whatever, but I also can just download it on my Series S and give it a try. And if I don't like it, oh well, I'll just delete it and move on with my life. I think that that's a real powerful sort of sales pitch for the Series S specifically. You know, it's funny, when you look at the Series S and its lack of disk drive, it is a little bit of a shame just because Xbox has such terrific backwards compatibility. And I will say that there are a lot of original Xbox and 360 and Xbox One games that are available on Game Pass. But if you have an Xbox One, a One S, a One X, or even a Series X, you'll be able to easily pick up super cheap like 360 games, throw it in there, and odds are that they will work. So a little bit of a downside when it comes to running on the Series S. But if you're out here to have the most complete Xbox experience, let me give you some great news. The Xbox Series X exists, and it is a better console of this in almost every single way. But at $500, it's also a more expensive console. And I think for a lot of people, the trade-off in value is absolutely worth it to pick up the Series S. And it's so refreshing to go back to a little console that just goes underneath my TV and doesn't require its own spotlight, candelabra, and music, fanfare every time I turn it on.
It can almost fit in Matt's pocket.
But where are my Jankos?
Unlike the PS5, which has an internal SSD which you could swap out yourself, on the Xbox Series S and X you have to use the storage expansion module. So when it first launched, there were only a handful of modules available and they were very expensive. Thankfully, this has gotten a little bit better. So right now you can get yourself a 512 gig expansion for about $80 or 1 terabyte for about $150. And there are now options from both WD and Seagate. I would still love to have a little bit more of a DIY experience, but it is now at least somewhat feasible to upgrade the Series S or Series X yourself. Like obviously we're gonna play a bunch of games and show some of the sort of performance, but just the philosophy of the Series S, I think, is really, I've kind of warmed up on a lot. Like I've always liked this console, but sort of coming back to it 3 years later, seeing games that have been properly optimized for it now that we've kind of gotten rid of some of the shackles of last generation, I feel good about the Series S and its future. And I wasn't so sure about that in the beginning. This is a really good time to talk about the Series S because there are now proper Xbox exclusives for this generation that are only on the Series S and the Series X and the PC. But, well, for the purpose of this conversation, it's only on the Series S and the Series X. It's one thing to read the speeds and feeds and to watch Digital Foundry all day, but it's another to actually play some of the games on the Series S. So let's start out with a couple of titles that are exclusive to this generation of Xbox, starting with Starfield. Now, Starfield is a game that has gotten some criticism for its performance, not only on PC, which I'm recording this on launch day, so probably some patches and some optimizations, certainly for NVIDIA graphics cards, but also the fact that both on Series S and Series X, it only runs at 30 frames per second. Now, this is pretty standard, especially for last generation and certainly for Bethesda titles. And while of course it's always nice to have 60 frames per second, when you look at some of the things that Bethesda are doing with Starfield, it is quite next gen. I mean, I can't get that many potatoes to fall out my airlock door on an Xbox One, can I? At least I can't do it at 60 FPS. It would be at like potato FPS. Now, some of the other things I like about Starfield is the details. So this is one of these games that is starting to really show what this generation of console is capable of without the shackles of Xbox One and PS4 holding things back. So with the much improved CPUs and the very solid graphics, even on the Series S, what we're seeing is incredibly detailed textures. Now, yeah, Starfield is not running at 4K on the Series S, but honestly, yes, if you pixel peep, you'll see that like, oh, the shadows aren't quite as nice, and there's certainly not as much detail in the distance. But when you're actually playing the game, the things that I care about is how well does it just generally look, and also how well does it play, because fluidity is important. I mean, personally, I think this looks pretty nice, and when I see the arguments, and there's some validity, I will give you, but when I say the arguments about how the Series S is holding back the generation, to me, I don't fully buy it. Now, yeah, this is certainly a less powerful console, but you're still getting the same games. Am I running them at lower resolutions and slightly lower settings? Yes, but that's the same thing I would do when I'm playing on a mid-range PC compared to a high-end PC, right? It doesn't hold PCs back as long as I've got that fast SSD storage, the 8-core CPU. Like, there's a lot of things that are very similar with the Series S and the Series X. The main difference is the size of memory and just how powerful the GPU is. One thing I know some people have complained about is the post-processing with Starfield. Yeah, there's quite heavy like depth of field, and especially like motion blur and like film grain, but honestly, I feel like it actually helps. Especially the motion blur, considering that this is only a 30 FPS experience, helps really to kind of improve that fluidity. I think it looks nice. And when we're running at slightly lower settings, I think that that film grain kind of helps to hide a little bit of the pixeliness, which is definitely a technical term. In the case of Starfield, I feel like I am getting substantially a very, very similar experience to what I would be getting on the Series X, just at, 1080-ish instead of 4K. I can live with that, especially considering how much money I saved. Where a game like Starfield runs fine at 30 FPS, when it comes to the new Forza Motorsport 60 FPS, that fluidity is really important. Now, I will say that this is an early copy of the game, so this is just a preview build. I can only do a few races here, but there are a couple things I do want to point out. So Turn 10 do give you 2 different modes. So just like with a lot of games for the Series S, you can run it either visuals or performance mode. Visuals is 30 FPS, performance is 60, and they specifically call out that performance is recommended, and I agree. Not just because I think that 60 FPS and that fluidity is important for a racing game, but also in my opinion, the visual mode doesn't look that much better. Now, of course, I am just talking about the Series S version of the game. If you're playing on X, maybe the fidelity mode is gonna look a little bit better with ray tracing and whatnot, but for me, that fluidity is absolutely what I'm looking for. And as you're about to see, it still looks pretty good on Series S, man. It still looks pretty good. Now, keep in mind that I don't have a apples-to-apples comparison with Gran Turismo just because I don't have the same cars and same tracks, but like, the general feeling is certainly that the cars feel a bit heavier, a little bit more weighty. You can tell when you overcook in a corner, you're just gonna understeer, which is the way it is in real life, for most cars at least. Now you can see here that I've got a very smooth 60 FPS, and to me, it's really nice. Now, if you want to pixel peep, you want to pull out your digital foundry glasses, you will be able to tell that it is not the sharpest presentation in the world, specifically when I'm sitting right in front of a monitor like this. So you look at the gauges, you look at some of the distance, it's not massively sharp. But as far as being able to enjoy the game and have a great time, there's nothing here that's bothering me. I can easily make out everything, and if I'm sitting even slightly farther away, the differences are not huge. So in an actual race scenario, which is a little bit more demanding, what you'll see is the performance is still really solid. Now, the game is going to be, oh, good Lord. Okay, all right. What if I just smash him? Just to test the Series S, of course. Let's just smash him. Oh my God, that looks bad. All right. Whoops. Who needs all your paint? I think paint is optional. Something else with the Series S is that you're not really getting a lesser experience when it comes to playing online titles. So take something like Overwatch 2, for example, which is a terrific version of the game on Series S that if you want to, you actually can crank it all the way up to 120 FPS. I was just playing on the standard model, which is like 1440p and 60, and it's incredibly smooth. It's really, really well optimized, which, mind you, not a graphically demanding game, but the same cannot be said for Call of Duty Warzone 2.0. That is quite a demanding game. And when you look at this compared to running on like a PS4 or something, it is a night and day difference. Again, of course, it is not going to look quite as nice as on your PC or your Series X or your PS5, but importantly, it's still a very smooth gameplay experience, and it still looks pretty good, especially the draw distance is plenty good enough for me to pretend to snipe people from a very long way away. We're giving up a little bit when it comes to the raw pixel counts and just how far the settings have been pushed out. But at the end of the day, you're still getting largely the same performance. Not in all cases, but in most cases, you're still getting a very smooth, very playable 60 FPS in most of these titles. And that even comes across to GTA 5. So GTA 5 is now included with Game Pass, which is part of the reason why I wanted to try it for this video. And as someone who played GTA 5 when it came out on the Xbox 360 like 10 years ago, the fact that it's a nice smooth 60 FPS, it's high res, and yeah, the Series S is not going to be quite as nice looking as the Series X because it doesn't have like some of the ray tracing and whatnot, and probably not worth actually paying for that upgrade. But if you've got it including Game Pass, I think it's actually still a very solid version of the game. Out of the games I've tried, I have not found a single title, whether it's a brand new, current generation exclusive, whether it's a modern, powerful title, or whether it's a little bit of an older game that's, been around for a bit like GTA 5 or something that's not super demanding like Overwatch. Not one of these games is a measurably worse experience when it comes to gameplay, not graphics. All these games are a little less high resolution, a little less detailed than on the higher end consoles. Now, a lot of people have pointed to Baldur's Gate not supporting the Xbox Series S when it comes to split screen mode as an example of why the Series S is holding this generation back. I get the argument that this is less powerful, that it could hold things back, but in reality, if I'm spending this much less, I'm expecting a slightly lesser experience. I don't think it's as big of a negative as I think a lot of people are trying to make it out to be. Especially when you consider this is a $300 box that with a Game Pass subscription gives you tons of titles that you simply can't play on like PS5. I think that's still a very compelling value proposition. I don't want this video to entirely come off as I'm a Series S defender, but I think it's gotten an unfair rap. And especially now that we're 3 years into this generation, the Series S I think has really sort of come into its own in a way now that we're really seeing these games that are exclusive to this generation. It's impressive to me, honestly. And I feel like I'm very happy that there is a entry level into this generation that's not gonna cost you $500. Because let's be real, the Series S is gonna be the cheapest version of any console you can buy for quite some time. Maybe ever. I have the luxury of playing all kinds of super high-end hardware. And guess what? I had exactly the same amount of fun playing all these games on the Series S. Did they look a little less shiny? Yep. Did that matter at all to me? Nope. Have fun. Play your games. Doesn't matter where you do it. But the Series S, pretty good place to do it. That's a conclusion.